Welcome back to the Deeper 2025 podcast. Today we're going to be looking at Luke 18. Before we dive in, let me just remind you to like this video, share this video with your friends, do all those things that you normally do on YouTube if things are helpful to you. This encourages us to continue and lets us know that what we're doing is making an impact. Well, in Luke 18, there's a story that starts out at the very beginning of a persistent widow who needs help, and she goes to a judge, and Jesus tells the story of this judge is an unrighteous judge. He's not even a judge that even cares about people, really. But this widow is so persistent that even this unrighteous judge begins to grant her request. And it's a reminder of our prayer life and what our prayer life should be like. Our prayer life should be one of those that we are just persistent in asking for what we need. Now listen, don't go and ask for a Corvette and just say, you know what, if I'm persistent enough to ask God for a Corvette, then he'll give me a Corvette. That's not at all what we're talking about here. We're talking about our needs and the needs of others that we should be praying about. But unlike the judge who was unrighteous, God is a father who the Bible tells us is eager to give good things to his people and to his sons and daughters. And so just a couple of things I learned in this passage as we've read Luke 18 is the first one is what I've already said, be persistent in prayer. Don't give up when it seems that answers aren't coming. Don't give up when you pray for it 2 or 3 days and then you're like, you know what, I don't know if God's ever going to answer this prayer. Sometimes God just wants to see if we're going to keep bringing our needs to him, if we're going to be persistent in prayer. And so just be persistent. Don't give up. Continue in praying. I remember the song about don't stop praying from Matthew West, but be persistent in prayer. Here's the second thing. Trust in God. Trust in God. We have to trust in God in 2 ways. The first way we have to trust in God is we have to trust in God and his justice. You know, in this world, it seems like injustice reigns. Does it not? In this world, it seems like that chaos is having its day and that there is no justice to be found anywhere. But I've got news for you that God is a God of justice. And in his timing, he will bring justice. And so don't stop trusting that God is going to make things right in the proper time. And that's the second thing we've got to trust God with. It's his timing. Now, maybe you're not like me, but when I have a need in my life or I have a need at the church, I want God to meet that need right now. I want to be able to pray about it one day and the next day, poof, it's happened, it's done, the prayer's answered, everything is fixed. But I also have to remember that I've got to trust God's timing. I've got to trust that he's got a perfect plan. He's got a purpose. He's even got a purpose of you walking through difficult times sometimes in an area of need so that he can teach you that you should trust him. But we've got to trust his timing. We got to trust that his timing is perfect, that our timing as humans is not perfect, that we don't have it all figured out, but he does have it all figured out. So Jesus challenges us with this story about the widow who's persistent in asking and the judge who is unrighteous, but he gives in and he relents when he sees the persistentness of this widow. And so be persistent in prayer. Trust that God has your best interest at heart and trust that in his timing, he's going to make everything work together for the good of those who love him. You know, that's what Romans 8 says. We like to talk about Romans 8:28. And in Romans 8:28, we find that God works all things together for the good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. But we miss verse 29 a lot of times. We end at verse 28. We put a period there and we're like, you know what? God wants what's good for me. But verse 29 tells us the reason he does all those things is so that we will look more like Jesus today than we did yesterday. Sometimes looking more like Jesus means we've got to suffer a little longer. We've got to be in need a little longer. And we've got to trust that God has perfect justice, he's got perfect timing, and he's got a perfect will and a perfect plan and purpose for our life. And if you'll go through and you'll just be persistent, let me give you a challenge before we leave. This week, it's Monday, this week, I want you to choose one specific prayer need that you have, one specific prayer request that you have, and I want you to pray about that daily, and I want you to pray in faith that God is going to answer that prayer in his timing, and I want you to pray persistently for that need that you have, and just see what God does if you'll just pray persistently for that one thing during this week.